Ledbetter, how do you feel that I am telling you right now on this video, on this recording, that the Texas Longhorns are 7-point home favorites against the TCU Horned Frogs, the number 4 team in the country?
Wow. Okay. So before we started recording, Juju said this is going to be a guess. I said TCU would have been like 4-point favorites. Wow. 7. Wow. Okay. Good for Texas. All right. 7-point favorites. Wow. I'm a little surprised by that, but all right. Good on Texas.
I think everyone, even in the 5-1-2, Austin, Texas, is a little bit surprised by that because I think a lot of us in Big 12 country have respect for this TCU Horned Frogs team. As much as I want the Longhorns to beat them, because obviously I really want the Longhorns to beat them. That's a storm the field type moment for this current iteration of the Texas Longhorns. A full touchdown. I ask myself so often, what does Vegas know that I don't know? Because I think that has to be the main thing. Like, if you're giving a team a touchdown, like we know that Vegas gives teams 3 points for being the home team, just off a sense of there is a home field advantage in football. But even that's saying that you think they're at least a 4-point team better than this TCU team. I don't know, TCU's dealing with some injuries. They have an injury at the wide receiver position that's going to hurt them. But obviously, you look at what Duggan's done this year, putting himself in the Heisman conversation. You look at what Sonny Dykes has done as the head coach of TCU, and they've earned every bit of the respect that people are now giving them. I go back to thinking about Mountain West time when it came to TCU and how fun of a team they were back then. They got to have a little bit of that vibe now as they fight for a spot in the college football playoff in the Big 12. And they have to go through, this is probably their last big test against this Texas Longhorns team. Obviously, they have to go undefeated the rest of the way to secure their spot. But why do you think Vegas is giving Texas this line?
Because Texas has more talented players.
I think that's an easy answer. I think that we've so often said this as we've done all these previews throughout this year, that Texas does have the more talented roster. Texas should set the expectations higher. But the problem is, as I've mentioned in our Sark video, I think there's a mentality issue with Texas that always kind of holds them back. And it even showed its ugly head this past week as Texas was crushing Kansas State. They were making that one an easy game, no problem, as they were doing a couple weeks before that when they were facing Oklahoma State. And then the bad Texas came in. Texas in the second half, which is clear they have a second half issue. I go back to, we had our conversation about Josh McDaniels and Raiders. The Texas Longhorns have a second half issue as well in terms of blowing all these leads. They held KSU within a touchdown. If you go back to the drive that secured the victory, Kansas State had an opportunity to win that game. It was a real opportunity. It took an amazing fumble forced by the defensive lineman on Texas to win that game, to secure that game for them. Hey, they were able to do it, but it was not easy, which is so often the case with this Texas team. That's like, I look at this TCU game, and I'm like, are they going to make it easy? We know they're better at home. That's something I'll tell you about this Texas team. They are so much better at home. You go back to the Alabama game, when they were shutting down the Alabama offense, Bryce Young holding them to 20 points. That all happened in Austin, Texas. Well, they got to have TCU come to their house this week. It's college game day, big game, biggest game of the week. TCU, Texas. Everyone's going to be raucous in the crowd. There's going to be somewhat of a split fan base. There's going to be a lot of TCU fans that could travel into Austin. It's only a 3.5-hour drive, so no biggie there. I wonder how much of a home field advantage it's really going to be, because ultimately it's an in-state game, a heated game, rivals. I like Texas's chances when you consider just the talent, because again, we just always have to go back to the talent. Quinn Ewers, friendly confines. We saw made huge strides from the Oklahoma State game, was a much better quarterback, a much more confident quarterback in the Kansas State game. First road Big 12 game, Oklahoma State. So I'm like questioning how much I should hold that against him. I mean, come on, it's your first road game as a freshman, Oklahoma State. Even in Red River, at least that's a neutral site game. Yeah. That's not anywhere comparable to going to Stillwater and having to deal with that crowd. Okay, yeah. We come back to Austin. In Austin, we go back to Quinn Ewers starts in Austin. 3 touchdowns against Iowa State, had that big game against Alabama, that big first half against Alabama. He can get it done here at home. Bijan Robinson, of course, if you can get the running game going, because it's not like TCU has a great defense. if anything, if you're to script this game out, right, it's going to be a shootout. There's going to be a lot of points from both teams on that scoreboard. That's the pathway to victory. I guess for Texas, the way you win is you just have to make more plays on defense. You just got to force a turnover. If whoever wins the turnover battle is going to win this game.
Texas is in this really interesting place, I've realized, because remember at the start of the year, going all the way back to the beginning, where I said very firmly 8-4 is a successful season for Texas this year. And I've stuck to that the entire season. In every one of these previews, I have not wavered from the expectation, regardless of how chaotic the Big 12 has been. 8-4 is that goal for Texas. And 8-4 at this point probably won't get you into the Big 12 championship game, presuming that TCU, no matter what, is going to have a spot because they won't lose 2 of these last games. And even if they lose 2 of these last games, it might not matter because a 3-loss conference team might get into the game with weird tiebreaker situations, just based on how Baylor and Kansas State and Texas all play the last few games of the season. But 8-4 is the goal. If you can win this one, that path becomes increasingly clear because they got Kansas on the road and Baylor to end the season. Texas wins out, they're going to the Big 12 championship game. That's a guarantee because of the tiebreaker situation with K-State and playing Baylor head-to-head to end the season. So if they win out, they're going to the Big 12 championship game. And this is an interesting space that they find themselves in because I'm guessing they're going to be favored or close to favored in each of these last few games. And I think a realistic scenario is finishing 8-4 at this point this year, because if the Baylor game and the TCU game we both consider to be toss-ups, the most likely scenario is finishing 1-1 in those 2 games. So I think it's really interesting to see how these last few games play out, especially because they survived the Kansas State game where, again, they controlled most of the way. They were 3-point favorites going into the game against Kansas State on the road. So clearly they acknowledged the talent discrepancy between the 2 teams in that evaluation. And I mean, this is the big game of the season where it's going to determine whether this season is above expectations or meeting expectations, because even though they're 7-point favorites, we kind of expect TCU to win this game just based on reputation, being 9-0, the fact that they have a path to the playoff that requires them now to beat Texas and Baylor, which I think they'll lose one of those games and not make the playoff. But I mean, this is a game that even though they're favored, we kind of think of it as a toss-up, right? And so this is where the season's expectations will kind of come into focus. It's a weird way to get to 6-3, but they are 6-3 right now. And that's about where we expected they would be at this point, going into a game against a team ranked in the top 5, who's going to be the home team in the Big 12 championship game. And of course, Baylor the last week of the season. So this is an interesting space that Texas finds themselves in going into this game.
Just to make sure I got the name in right here, Quentin Johnson is actually the wide receiver that TCU might not have available to them in this game. So maybe that played a little bit into this line. It just still is so jarring when we're talking about, we know the separation in the rankings between these 2 teams is vast when we're talking about a top 5 team versus the 23rd, 22nd team, whatever their ranking is at this point. It's irrelevant. A team in the 20s versus a team in the top 5, there's usually a discrepancy in favor of the team that's in the top 5. So it is odd. It tells you that Vegas isn't sold on TCU. And if you told me preseason that TCU would be to this point at the same time, I might not have bought in, but we've seen too many games. We've reached the point where we have to say that TCU is a good team. It's crazy that they're still not getting acknowledged in that respect. Maybe it plays a little bit into their strength of schedule, because if you look at TCU's schedule, they haven't really beaten anyone. Their best win is like Oklahoma, and we recognize that Oklahoma is not a great team this year. Oklahoma, in fact, when we compare who blew out Oklahoma worse, obviously Texas blew out Oklahoma a lot worse in the Red River game. They beat Colorado. There's not a lot of impressive wins. So if you really believe that TCU's 9-0 record is nothing more than a mirage, and that's fine. So that explains the line right there. I just don't think it is. I think that they have an offense that can compete with any team in the nation, and that's why they're in a position to make the college football playoff. Still, with that said, hook them. I'm picking the Longhorns. I'm going to stay strong in this resolve. Texas, hey, I will say this. Take TCU with the points. Take TCU with the points. I don't know what the odds makers are doing, but if they're giving you a TCU with 7 points, lock that in right now. Still, Longhorns win outright.
So this is interesting because remember last week I said if Deuce Vaughn goes for 250 yards or 30 yards, I'd kind of believe it because the Big 12 is just stupid this year. And somehow TCU has not succumbed to the stupidity of the Big 12 yet. They are the only undefeated team, and no other team in the conference has fewer than 2 conference losses at this point. K-State, Baylor, and Texas all have 2 conference losses. TCU still has to play Baylor and Texas. Texas still has to play TCU and Baylor, so that'll get sorted out at some point here. In fact, Baylor plays K-State this week, which will be interesting as well to watch because one of those teams is going to have 3 losses in the conference by the end of the week, which should eliminate them from conference championship play. It might not, but it probably should. I am with no confidence going to pick the Texas Longhorns to win this game. I'm going to pick Texas to win against TCU. I picked them last week against K-State, but if this means in the near future that they're going to be picked to lose at home against Baylor, I'm sorry if that's a consequence that comes with this, but because they got to get to 8-4 somehow. They got to get to 8-4 somehow if that's the expectation, which means they got to lose one of these games. And I do actually think looking at the matchups and looking at the TCU offensive numbers compared to what Texas's defense has done against similar type of teams, I do think Texas matches up favorably in that respect. And we know how good the Texas offense is. They have rolled through many of these games this year with very few hiccups to point to, especially hiccups where all 3 of their best players are healthy. So I do believe Texas will win this game, but I also think they'll go 8-4. Not sure how that's going to play out, but I do think Texas will win.
I'll end it on this, that if they go 8-4, if they go 2-1, that one can't be Kansas. If that losses to Kansas, then I don't care. 8-4 or not, leave Sark and Lawrence. Don't even let them on the team bus. Anyway, guys, let us know in the comment section what you think. Big game of the weekend, big game in the Big 12, TCU, Texas. Who wins in Austin Saturday night? We'd like to know your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to our channel, follow us on all our social medias, which you can find tucked safely and securely in our YouTube bio. Follow us on all streaming platforms. And we, Kyle Ledbetter, Juju, we'll see you next time.